Hello, everyone. Welcome to Studio A3R. This is Jennifer Sertl, your host, and I just want to thank Anthony Molina for that amazing music. It always makes me feel like going to dancing afterwards. And I'm here in the studio in Rochester, New York at ROC Vox with Scott Fitzgerald. And welcome, Scott. How are you doing today? He's our producer, so I guess he's our host.
I'm doing fabulous. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. You were talking to me about some things you're doing with your son. Tell me.
We're lifting weights, trying to get back into shape. It's pretty fun. I definitely am learning my physical limits from, the last time I really worked out with any vigor was in probably 10 years ago. So I'm kind of like, I can't do that anymore, but I'll try. But it's good. It's good bonding time.
Oh, that's great. Well, you look fabulous. It's always great to see you. And he's rearranging in his studio, and he had just some really cool posters up, which is super cool. And I actually have an interesting kind of thing to share. Is that I got contacted recently from someone that I only knew in fifth grade. I used to live in Sun River, Montana, with a population 200, and my father was the neighborhood veterinarian. And we lived next to a boy named Eddie, who out of the blue called. So it's just one of those things.
Wow, that's interesting.
It was out of the blue. And I just think that, for especially people in the Army or people that move quite a bit, I had moved 19 times in my life.
Oh, my goodness. I can't imagine.
It's a lot, it's a lot, but it just, to me, it was like, wow, sometimes you plant roots and you don't even know that you have planted roots. So that's kind of my message to anyone that even, 12, 11, 13 years old, that you might have made an impression and someone might be looking for you, and it might be a good thing that they're looking for you. I know sometimes in my life there have been people looking for me that I haven't wanted to find me. But anyway, that was a good story.
I wonder what eight-year-old Jennifer Sertl is like.
I don't think I think just my vocabulary has changed. Anyway, I'll send you some pictures. The older I get, the more I like to be recognized as younger. But anyway, on with our show. Today's a special treat, especially because I hope you can see here, I'm holding up my mug of the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. And I got this mug and this awesome keychain from Michael Canic, who is just a remarkable business coach and strategist. And the reason I kind of recognize the word coaching here is that we actually met at a really wonderful retreat in Santa Barbara, where we didn't know each other, but we were both kind of students of Tom Hill, who was an incredible coach and someone that made a remarkable difference in my life. And so we became friends, and I brought him to Rochester to give his wonderful talk, Ruthless Consistency, to a group of leaders that I was running. And we had such a great connection. So I just thought I would start today saying I still have my mug, and I would like to welcome Michael Canic to the show.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great to be here, and great that you still have that mug. Boy, that was a few years ago now, 10 years ago.
A decade. And actually, even though we've connected a couple of times through email, this is the first time I've seen you since 2010. And you look, I feel like you must be Dorian Gray. I'm nervous to go up into your attic because you look amazing. You look the same as I remember.
Thank you. You look exactly the same.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much. So our program really is about how do people design for resilience? And, the questions we ask: where have you been? What have you learned? Where are you going? And then what is required? I use that as kind of the template that we use, but I honor you to share your journey, that what makes sense. It started with the ruthless, and then now there's the word consistency that I'm seeing. And so I'm really interested to learning that pivot, as well as what you've been, what you've learned in the last 10 years since we've actually seen each other face to face.
Right. So let me catch up in the last 10 years. First of all, it's been an amazing journey. I've really had the great fortune of having a number of fantastic clients and colleagues. And as much as I'm consulting to them, I've learned a great deal from them as well. So, my business, as you know, is bringing together strategy plus culture plus execution. And when you bring the three of those things together, it really leads to some outstanding results. So working with, CEOs, committed CEOs of mid-market companies to really help them, develop, execute strategy, achieve what they want to achieve, fulfill their ambitions for their organizations. And ruthless consistency simply refers to the relentless alignment of decisions and actions with one's stated intentions. And all of us have intentions and ideas and plans and goals, but are we willing to consistently make sure that every decision, every action is aligned with those intentions? So over time, I've found more and more that when companies don't achieve what they want to achieve or intend to achieve, it's because of misalignment. It's because they haven't aligned decisions and actions. And maybe to dive into it a bit, that can be anything from developing what is the focus of our organization? What are our goals? How do we align the environment so our people can perform at their best? How do we make sure that our processes, our people, our structure, our systems, everything is aligned with what we want to achieve? It really is very detailed. And what makes it so tough and why so many strategic change initiatives fail is that any misalignment could undermine everything. So the notion of ruthless consistency is really this unwavering commitment, this relentless focus, this on what we intend to achieve. And to be clear, consistency doesn't mean that doing the same thing robotically all the time. It means a consistent sense of purpose. And it may take varied actions and approaches to get that done, but it's really about that consistency of purpose. So, in short, Jennifer, the last 10 years have been working with companies, learning from them, helping them really make sure they are consistent with their decisions and their actions, with their stated intentions. And what I found is that when organizations are true to that, they accomplish far more than if they're not ruthlessly consistent.
And we can't take people where we haven't been. And so you as a leader, how do you create that internal alignment?
Right. It's a good question. What I do is, so I have a number of goals and objectives for myself. And every morning I review those. They're on my iPhone. So every morning, the first thing I do, I get up and I look at my objectives, my purpose, my identity, my goals, all those things, and then start to plan the day. Now, to be clear, I'm far from perfect at this, but I have a cadence, a frequency to make sure that, am I being true to what I'm wanting to achieve? And I look at each day, what am I doing to advance each of my three main objectives? So, that's probably the biggest thing I do. By nature, I tend to be quite self-reflective, and I like feedback loops and assessing and self-assessing and reassessing. And that cadence, that cycle of reassessment and recalibration is really what helps me, attempt to live the same thing.
Has there, I'll just tell from my own personal process, is that I have a sword fight with sabotage, right? I'm very, motivated, very clear on purpose, and yet I do have to I have to have a sword fight with sabotage. Do you have any ways that you've learned to slay sabotage, or is that not something that you've ever had to struggle with?
Well, first of all, yes, I've had to struggle with a number of things, and I have my 4 drivers of success and my 4 enemies of success. And for me, the 4 enemies of success are cluttering, procrastination, randomization, and distractibility. So I think all of us have those demons we need to slay, to be successful. With sabotage in particular, that depends what that looks like. But first of all, recognizing it. So recognizing it is always the first step, recognizing and acknowledging it. Then can we craft an alternate pattern? So as soon as we recognize we're doing something to sabotage ourselves, boom, can I trigger an alternate pattern? And in advance of that, you have to determine what is that pattern. And then you have to start to apply that pattern. And it does take discipline at first, but if you can do it consistently enough, then it becomes habit. So, awareness and recognition, identifying an alternate pattern, and then applying that alternate pattern enough so that it becomes habit. It sounds very simple. I know in real life it's more difficult than that. But as a general process, that's what I like to apply.
That's great. I think that the hard part for me in this show is that I'm immersing into the conversation. And so I'm still processing a couple of words back. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. But now you're on to the next. Would you be kind enough to repeat those 4, but take a pause after you say each of them, just so that
Sure.
I can actually let them in?
Sure. So what I call my 4 enemies of success that I review daily. Number 1 is cluttering. So whether that's physical cluttering on my desk or whether that's cluttering of activities in my life, the first thing I like to do is declutter. let's clear off at least some space on my desk. Let's clear off my calendar so I can put in place what I want to put in place for the day. Number 2 is randomization. Am I going to take on things randomly as they catch my eye, or am I going to be intentional and say, here's what I'm going to work on first, here's what I'm going to work on next, and so to plan the day. Now, importantly, the day often goes off the rails. So just as important as planning is recalibrating, making sure that I come back, I'll look at that count, and I may recalibrate a half dozen times a day, Jennifer, seeing that, I'm off track. This took way longer than I thought, or I had to take that client call I wasn't anticipating. I go back to the schedule and recalibrate. And I'm at peace with the idea that, no, that's okay. Reality happens, so you have to allow yourself to recalibrate. So the second enemy then is randomization. And what I do is plan and recalibrate to deal with that. The third is procrastination. And that is where, we know, I want to do something, but I just don't feel like it. Then I go to what I feel like doing. So I find the solution for that for me is to have quick cycle feedback loops, which might be I'll set a timer on my computer. So every 45 minutes it goes off and it's a trigger to check in. Am I on track? Am I doing what I want to do, or have I been procrastinating? The fourth one then is distractibility. And, what's the solution to that? To plan positive distractions, because the fact is all of us need to take breaks. All of us are subject to distractions. Can we corral the distractions that we subject ourselves to? Can we corral, when we look at social media? Can we corral when we do our calls each day? Can we corral those things? And then do we apply ways to, overcome that? So I find, if I'm feeling like I'm just losing energy for a few minutes, I just don't feel like doing this, I need to take a break, then I'll plan a positive distraction. So maybe it'll be maybe I'll go do a set of push-ups or something, or some activity, but some positive distraction, acknowledging we need distractions, but trying not to be consumed with them. So for me, I have to work at overcoming those 4 enemies of success: cluttering, randomization, procrastination, and distractibility.
Thank you for that detail. I think was very valuable. And, I think many times people think of driving a strategy like driving on the road, but after listening to you, especially with your point about the flight, I feel more like a flight plan. I feel like more of a pilot than a driver. It just as I'm kind of hearing you for the first time around how someone, we know where we want to land, but we have to adapt and look at our dashboard. So that's really, really amazing. How most of the work that I knew you as was live facilitation and coaching. How are you adapting to the new way of business that I think is, I don't think it's a phase of time. I think it's the new way of doing business. How are you adapting to this?
Right. So 2 parts to that. One is when it comes to speaking events or event speaking, say, to Vistage groups or 3-hour workshops, a couple things have to be done differently. First of all, people need more frequent breaks. Secondly, there needs to be more interaction, because when you talk about distractibility, people are more easily distracted when they're on a virtual call in a meeting than if they're there in person. So I make it a point to interact with people, ask people, engage them, have them doing things much more often than if I was there in person. Third, you have to make sure you're not just communicating at people, you're communicating with them. So I think, the whole mindset of a presentation or workshop now, and again, depending on the size of the group that you're with online, needs to be a much more 2-way than just 1-way. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things I've done with presentations and workshops. Now, when it comes to consulting, that consulting is all done virtually. Similar principle applies. We have to take more breaks. And I encourage people during breaks to take movement breaks, not just to sit in their chair and take breaks. And you have to recognize people may have been on virtual calls all day. So rather than having, say, 2 consecutive days of strategy sessions, we might have, 4 half days that are spaced apart to give people mental time, mental space to adjust. So it's being mindful of the fact that the attention span, the distractibility is different when we're not with people in person, and then redesigning our approach to respect that.
One of the reasons I really appreciated your work and wanted to work with you, in the past and the present, is your commitment to execution. If I look at the books that are coming out, there's so much pressure on innovation, and there's so much, about marketing. There's so much about, many, many things, but there's very little about maintaining, and there's very little about execution, even coming out from Harvard Business Review and, that wonderful book, Execution, Ram Charan. And why is there such a gap in the conversation around execution? As you and I know, that's the rub of any throughput whatsoever. It just boggles my mind.
Well, I'll answer that in 4 words. Because execution is hard.
Execution is hard. It is hard. And so
that's it. So, and we, so it's exciting and fun to talk about innovation and new things and their strategy and new markets and all of that. And all of that's great stuff. But at the end of the day, strategy without execution is a dream. Execution without strategy is aimless. So we need strategy and execution. And in my conception, strategy plus culture plus execution leads to an outstanding organization. So what I've focused on the last 20 years in working with companies is really trying to determine what are the key elements that drive execution. What do committed leaders need to do to make it happen? And that is the hard part.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because you had mentioned earlier that there must be a difference between leaders and committed leaders. Do you have a core competency model for what a committed leader looks like?
Yes. Well, one of the things, I've talked about in the book, Ruthless Consistency, was how committed leaders have to look in the mirror. It starts with you. And in fact, the final chapter in the book is called "It's You Versus You." So at the end of the day, it's not you versus the competition. Yeah. It's not you and all trying to implement. It's not you. It's you versus you. And I want to put the spotlight square on the leader. The decisions that you make, the actions that you take, everything you say, everything you do, everything you don't say and you don't do has to be ruthlessly consistent with your intentions. And when you look at people, Jennifer, are successful, and that's in whether it's in business, it's in sports, it's in entertainment, it's in any field you look at, what you find is those people are very consistent. Everything they do is aligned with what they want to achieve. All the arrows are pointed in the right direction. That's commitment. So I think leaders think they're committed. They fool themselves into thinking they're committed because they lack benchmarks. So I like to present benchmarks of what true commitment looks like. And one of my favorite examples is Lindsey Vonn, the skier, who won more World Cup ski races by far than any female ski racer in history. And you think, well, that's great. What a talent. Well, the fact is, at a young age, she wasn't a great talent. But what she did, according to her coaches, was she skied tens of thousands more slalom gates than anybody else. So she put in the time and the effort, and she was a very intentional learner, looking what others did, what worked, what didn't work, and assessing her own performance. So I think we have to recalibrate what commitment looks like and give leaders benchmarks for what commitment looks like, and then they get to choose. Am I willing to be committed? Am I going to be a committed leader that's ruthlessly consistent to achieve what I want? Or should I modify my goals if I don't want to be that?
Right. I'm so glad you brought up Lindsey Vonn. Both of my daughters were ski racers, and we actually got a chance to meet Lindsey Vonn, and we very much have followed her strategy. And I love almost the reference to tipping points with Malcolm Gladwell and the idea of 10,000 hours, and that, that literally if you do more, that's probably why I'm so good at Twitter, is I just have been, at it longer. And it's that the contextual intelligence that comes from practice that can't be purchased. And even coached, right? Experiential learning is something very different. There's actually a great book my daughter was reading called Talent about, I wish I could remember the author. And in our write-up about this, I'll go ahead and include it. But it talks about, I think it's myelin, the muscle memory, and how to train the muscle memory. It's kind of cool. As I'm thinking, are there leaders willing to pay for this? Like, do you have... how is it hard to sell your work, or has it been easy to sell your work? Do you find, because in my own work, I'll just say it could be a projection, right? Is that I don't always find leaders that are willing to be introspective, and that level of they're like few and far between, unless I'm missing something and there's something amazing about your strategy to find the leaders willing to be that courageous.
Well, you're exactly right. Not all leaders are like that. And probably the biggest thing I've learned about being successful consulting over time is to pick the right clients. And early on, I would have thought, well, I can help convince them and I can help show them this. And the fact is, if a leader doesn't have a fundamental level of commitment, it's not going to work. So I apply filters when I'm looking at potential clients. Much like they're evaluating me, I'm evaluating them. And I apply what I call the 3 C's. I want to know, first of all, are they committed? Is it just, we think we should do this, or I'd like to do this? I want to get a sense of, well, what happens if this doesn't get done? What's the pain? How bad is this if this doesn't get done? So I really want to get a sense of commitment. Number 2, I want to get a sense of, are they capable? So do they have the capabilities? What are their skills like in terms of leading an organization and mobilizing people and pointing in the right direction? So I do want to get a sense of their capabilities. And then the third one, which is critically important, the third C, is control of ego. Mm-hmm. And while every CEO needs a strong ego to take risks, to make hard decisions, the question is, are they in control of their ego, or is their ego in control of them? So if I'm looking for clients now, Jennifer, I find I'm much more likely to be successful and help them be successful if they're committed, they're capable, and they're in control of their ego.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you have, can I see a copy of your book? I haven't yet ordered it to read it. I just wanted to make sure that it's shown on the screen, Ruthless Consistency, How Committed Leaders Execute Strategy, Implement Change, and Build Organizations That Win. I remember working with you when you actually started with defining winning. Where did your commitment to defining winning, is that something that you did as a coach beforehand, or tell me more about defining winning?
Yeah. So I think what started for me was, people would talk about vision. And then over time, I found that people would use vision in different ways. And, vision sometimes was the future. People would get into debates about mission and vision. For some, it sounded ethereal. And it seemed that, people want to be successful. So what is successful? Well, that's winning, whatever that looks like. And to be clear, winning doesn't mean there has to be a loser. It's simply achieving what we need to achieve. I'm sure my sports background and coaching background, contributed to that thinking. But, everybody wants to win. We want to feel like a winner. We want to be associated with winning. There are a lot of positive associations with that. So I think it touches people at an emotional level, maybe more so than some other terms. And just to be clear again, because some people bristle like, oh, that means winning, there's a loser. Well, no, it's really winning with, what you intend to achieve. Are you successful in achieving what you intend to achieve?
Right. Has there been, to the degree that you're comfortable sharing, has there been a failure? Like you had mentioned earlier that you learn all the time from your clients, and I remember you as an incredible listener. Is there a lesson we can learn from something that wasn't a win, perhaps, that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. Yes. And I've had certainly a number of those. Early on, it was more often because the CEO of the organization wasn't as committed as they said they were. And I learned after the fact that, going through a strategic management process was a nice to do, not a must do. That was probably a big learning. And then the second one was ego. And sometimes that's harder to get at because people will mask that. And I found I haven't been successful when a CEO is not willing to take responsibility or is not open to coaching. They want the glory, but they don't want to, take responsibility for the, if negative things happen. And I find if they're not willing to be open or vulnerable or secure enough to take responsibility, that's where I haven't succeeded. So and the way I've changed is I've lost some of that, or I've willingly given up some of that idealism where I can fix any organization, I can change anyone. The fact is I can't fix any organization and change anyone. I can't do it alone. But I can with a willing partner, a willing partner, we can achieve that.
The other thing that I remember that I think you did so well is you not only do you talk about benchmarks, but you create really neat tools for 360s in order to have the gaps identified and the perception gaps identified. A question that I really have is something that I haven't mastered is how to handle triangulation, where we're hired by a leader and we often get privy access to perceptions. And it's easy sometimes to be a messenger or to somehow be involved in triangulation. I don't know, one, is if that's ever happened to you, and if so, how did you handle it? I'm in a situation now where I'm really hoping to learn.
Okay. So are you talking about verifying maybe information you get or a perception that you get?
Maybe that's the problem. Nice solution alert there. No, have you ever, it just gets difficult as a consultant, as a bridge between, people executing the work and the vision. And sometimes it gets a little sticky. And so I'm just curious to know if you've ever gotten into a sticky situation in that bridge situation, or if in fact your tools and levers are so useful that you haven't been pulled into something like that.
Right. So where it gets sensitive is if you're dealing with a family business. And that's probably where I found the most sensitivity, when a family member is not doing what he or she needs to do. So you have to, I have to be sensitive to the context. So if I'm calling that person out like anyone else in a, strategic leadership team meeting, if there's some history and sensitivities, then, that can lead to some negative consequences. So I've got to know the context going into that and finding out in advance, what are the sensitivities around family and how to deal with it. That's probably the most sensitive area in dealing with those sticky situations you're talking about. The other one is just with the CEO, him or herself, is there a context where they have been or perceived they've been criticized or held accountable in front of the group? Because it's important collectively that, I'm able to hold people constructively accountable and constructively confront, what's being done. So I have to get a sense of, is that something we can just, do for the first time and then they're taken aback? Or do we have to be sensitive to what does that look like in the past? How do they respond? Maybe I have to coach the CEO so he or she can be comfortable and vulnerable and open to receiving that kind of feedback within a group. So there is some context and history and sensitivities we have to be aware of. Again, earlier in my career, I was probably too idealistic and thinking, this is just the right way to do things. And I've learned to be more sensitive to that context, trying to learn it and then trying to manage through it.
Right. That's great. I really, your commitment to feedback loops and the importance of feedback and teaching feedback, I think that's a skill. We need to all learn to be more receptive. And then we also need to learn how to really provide, very safe psychological and factual feedback. That's a huge skill set. I'm glad you pointed that out. Is there any question that you are hopeful that I ask or that you want to talk about?
We could talk about a lot of things, Jennifer. A lot of things. What I would ask, what is the of your listeners, what do you think is are there some big challenges or struggles with either strategy, culture, or execution that maybe you'd like me to dive deeper on?
The reason that we're doing Studio A3R is that many people are in a place where the future is uncertain. The money is uncertain, jobs are uncertain, and this is even pre this idea that that people have been planning for a world that no longer exists. And that's a belief that I have. And as a futurist, I'm usually kind of a little bit ahead of curves. And I'm wanting to see, how can I build a bridge between what I see and how people can act? The people that are introspective are already introspective. They ask these questions all the time. I'm wondering how to create a layer of depth in people that might need help learning how to stretch their introspective muscle.
Right. Okay, that's a very good question. And you're right, with the change that's going on, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of anxiety amongst people. And I think before we ask more of people, we have to be even closer to them emotionally and as people. So one of the things I'm coaching leaders on now more than ever, your people need reassurance. They need to know that you value them, that you respect them, that you care about them as individuals. because if you don't address those things, it's going to be hard to have them adjust in any cognitive way to, what's going on and the changes in the business and being more introspective. So I think at a fundamental human level, they simply have to know we care, it's safe, we're there with them, they're valued as individuals. That's the foundation. And then once we have that foundation, any changes we want them to make, let's make sure we're role modeling that as leaders. Let's make sure we're acknowledging things we're uncertain about. Let's acknowledge the things that maybe we're having struggle changing, right? Let them know they're not alone. That, it's not like we're some, perfect example of some of these changes, because we're not. So role model it for them and let them know we're in it with them, they're in it with us. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be easy, but I think we have to connect at that human level first, and then let them know if we're role modeling it, we're in it together. So the idea of a team, we're in this together, is more important now than ever.
So before you ask more of people, you need to be closer to people. And this
Absolutely.
is Michael Canic here on Studio A3R. I want to thank Scott Fitzgerald for us using his wonderful studio, Anthony Molina for his music, and Michael, it's been a really great opportunity to reconnect with you, and I look forward to reading your book. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jennifer.